Good evening and welcome to the Late Night Business. My name is Ian Dennis and I'm quite excited for the show that we have up, or rather lined up today, because the lady I'm about to have a conversation with, first of all, is from The Alliance. I think that's the first thing you literally have to say. Everybody goes through Alliance. That's the first introduction you have to put into place. She's a very astute business lady who has been in her industry for the last almost 25 years, has a head of state commendation and has done quite a lot. And before I get to tell you who exactly I'm speaking about, I want to let you know that we are at the Capital Club, the place whereby all entrepreneurs need to be. If you're an entrepreneur or in the corporate world and you need a place to literally get to network with the who's who, not only in Nairobi but around the world, the Capital Place is the place to be. The lady I'm about to have a conversation with also, I need to mention, is also just went for her PhD for one day, decided to drop out because she's from the Alliance. She is the CEO of PMS, Professional Marketing Services, one of the leading communication and advertising companies here in Kenya. Joanne Mwangi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's the most interesting introduction I've ever had.
I put some time into it. I researched on you quite well.
I can see. Thank you very much. So yes, I went to the Alliance Girls High School. And I think that it is a big plus because we learned a lot at Alliance that in as much as it has become a joke in Kenya, I think is really of great values. And the value system in terms of integrity, professionalism and hard work are things you do not lose through the years.
Interesting. So just take me through, maybe before you got admitted into the Alliance, how was Joanne's life? How was your upbringing? Where did you grow up? How was life for you in your earlier years?
I grew up in Nairobi and I was brought up as a Christian child, the typical Christian two-parent family. We were many siblings because we were all total about 9 of us. 9? Yes.
One mother, one father?
One mother, one father. Actually, it would be wrong to say one mother because I really had so many cousins living with us that were literally our siblings. There's no one time that we were ever just the primary family. Because in those days when people came to Nairobi, you looked for a relative to first settle in with. And then after that, you found your feet as you're looking for a job and all. And our home happened to be that place.
The transition point.
Yes, the transition point. So I was brought up always around community, around people. As a child, I was those kids who was very competitive. I think that maybe it's genetic, because when I was in kindergarten, primary school was what I wanted to be at because my elder siblings were going to primary. So I used to run away from nursery school. That day, we didn't know the word kindergarten those days. I used to run away from nursery school because I wanted to go to big school. So that's the kind of child I was. And I can tell you, I still remember Nairobi in all its glory when the streets were clean and the paths were actually properly manicured by the county government. Trash was collected every week. And the dispensaries and Nairobi City Council dispensaries were the best place you could go for medical care. That I have those memories.
I have no recollection of that.
I don't believe you are alive.
So growing up, what did you want to be? Do you remember what your ambitions were when you were a child? Because you mentioned that you in kindergarten you wanted to be with the big boys or maybe with the older children. For yourself, do you have any particular recollection of what exactly you wanted to be?
Growing up, the only careers I knew about were really either to be a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer, and finally a teacher. So those are the only 4 professions I was aware of. And so I had purpose that I was going to be a lawyer. And I remember that when I wrote my autograph book, we wrote autograph books when we were leaving school so that you could, remember all your friends. I remember writing and telling people that I was going to do law and I was going to be the Secretary General of the United Nations. And so they needed to keep my number. Well, you can see it didn't go that way.
But I still have your number. As you grew up, because I know there's a time, this is what exactly you wanted to become a lawyer, but how did it evolve over a period of time? Because from what exactly I'm getting, you are quite aware of who you are and who exactly you're becoming. How did it start changing to enable you to become who you are today?
I think maybe one of the most life-changing moments was when I was in Form 2 at Alliance, and I received a letter from my sister, my elder sister, who was in university in the UK. And one of the things she wrote to me is that if you want to make it in life, you have to make sure that you pass in your exams, because then once you pass, you have a choice as to what you want to do with the rest of your life. You'll never be restricted to any one genre. And then she also told me something very profound that has shaped my life. She told me, whatever you do, make sure that your life is not dictated by poverty. And so from that point on, I grew to understand that I needed to make money. So whereas previously I had not had any understanding or concept of money and how money makes the world go round, my elder sister Mary opened my eyes to the fact that you needed money to make your dreams come true. So I would say that was really a moment that turned my life around. And so when I went on to university, I remember that the one thing I was interested in... The University of Nairobi. Yes, the University of Nairobi. I mean, I've been to all these. And then, you know, the one thing I really wanted to do was to do a course that would impact society and impact lives. And so I did not make it to law. And I joined the Bachelor of Arts class. And when I was doing my Bachelor of Arts, I found that other people were doing the LSC marketing courses in CBD. And without a thought, I just joined. And that is how my life turned around, and I decided to become a marketer. All I knew is that I never wanted to be at a real desk job. I wanted to be able to talk to people, to be up and about, because my personality is not locked up in a corner. I like to be out and about. And so that's where I ended up.
Interesting. And I just doing a background check on you, and I think one of the influences also growing up besides your sister was also your father. I think he used to work in the hospitality sector. How much of an influence was he in terms of also just aiding you be where you are? Because I always want to find out what the person that you see today was actually aided by people behind it. So I wanted to find out how exactly did that happen.
If I'm to look at the people who really shaped who I am, there's so many, but parents are really primary. My mother brought us up, and she was, well, I wouldn't call her a housewife because she always had a business going. So she was housewife was the side hustle, let's put it that way. She always had a business going. So sometimes she'd be setting up a kiosk. And if she sets up a kiosk, and it's a typical kiosk, then the rest of us would be her labor. So we'd be there peeling potatoes, making uji, you know, and all the things that need to be done in a kiosk. We did, all of us. Sometimes it would be that she wants us to sell skuma wiki on the side of the road. So you come from school and you quickly go and get your sack of skuma wiki or kiondo of skuma wiki, and you go and you have to find a way of selling them as quickly as possible so that you can be free. So one of the things that we learned from very early on is that time is precious, and it's up to you to utilize your time very well so that you don't end up bogged with the things that you don't do. So I would say my mother taught me the life lesson of eating a frog in the morning. So if there's something I need to do that must be done that I don't enjoy doing, I want to do it as quickly as possible. So that's the biggest lesson I learned from mom. From dad, he was completely different. My dad, first and foremost, had walked from Muranga to Nairobi for him to come and build a life. Mogoiri, Keharo. So you can imagine, it already tells you the kind of ambition that he had. And when he got to Nairobi, he built a life for himself and ended up working for East African Airlines, or Airways that time, as a steward. And so thereafter, he worked for Pagoda Restaurant. I don't know whether you knew Pagoda.
No idea.
Pagoda was like the #1 Chinese restaurant in Kenya. Anybody who came to Kenya that was a dignitary, that's where they went. And he was the barman. So he could make cocktails, he could make, I mean, anything you wanted, he could do. So I grew up watching my father going to work in his starched white shirt, and then coming home for a nap in the afternoon and going back. He also started businesses. And so when he started his business in setting up a hotel in CBD, now that became our new job during school holidays. So I have been surrounded by entrepreneurship all my life. So I knew that to be in business is normal. And when you're in business, you sometimes succeed and you sometimes fail. So getting into business was really a no-brainer because I already had the template for business. So if you talk about influence, those have been very key influences.
Interesting. And you can see that at least that one creates the, what's it called, the foundation to where exactly it is you are. So you're done with the Lions, what's it called, it nurtured you to become who, what's it called, to who you are. You went to the University of Nairobi, but somewhere along the line, and I think we're just discussing this offline, you get your child very early. How exactly was it? Because this ambitious lady, you had a life planned for you and then life happens. How was that particular moment for you, and what exactly some of the lessons you learned out of it? Because it's something that's now happening to so many people, and probably someone watching this is undergoing that.
Actually, life used to happen very differently nowadays because by the time I was getting a baby, I already was getting married. So by the time of 18, you're already looking for a spouse. We were
18?
not waiting. Yes, we were not waiting to be 28.
18?
It was, yes, we were looking for spouses. So any boyfriend you were meeting in college, we were looking at it from the perspective of marriage.
Right.
This business of dating for fun, we didn't understand. We don't know that concept. So for me, by the time I was getting my daughter, I was already married at 19.
19.
So I got my daughter at 22. And so you find that life changes because, of course, parenting is hard. And you're a child yourself. And the guy is also a child.
Yes.
So both of you, honestly speaking, don't even know what you're doing. And yes, I agree life is an experiment, but some experiments need to be done later in life. So for me, I think that the one thing that I learned is that it was really hard being a parent. And so I got 2 children in quick succession. And so by 25, I had 2 children. Wow. I had my degree. I still got my university degree. And so I was juggling motherhood. I was juggling new career. And I was juggling self-improvement because I also went to do my master's. So at the United States University of Africa, USIU. So, you know, I started wanting to improve myself very early on, very, very early on.
Interesting. And I can try to imagine, because you're just in college and maybe you're trying to get work to try to sustain yourself. You have 2 mouths to feed. You have a household to take care of. How did you do all these things? I'm like, women, you're super women.
Frankly speaking, I wouldn't call myself a superwoman. I'd call myself at that point a super sufferer. It was really, really tough. Really, really tough. And when people want to paint a rosy picture of it, I'm the first to say it's not rosy, because I would hate to misguide any young person to imagine that it's all roses when you get into a relationship, or when you get babies, or when you're starting in a new job. You have to go through the paces, and the learning curve sometimes is very, very steep.
True.
So I went through all that, but the good thing is that as you go along, you get better at it, and you also cut yourself a lot of slack and recognize you don't have to be perfect.
True.
So if I was to live my life all over again, I think the one thing I would say is that I would first of all take it a lot slower, and then secondly, I would ask for help. I would really ask for help. I would ask for help from my aunties, from my mother. I would admit to my failures so that then I could get assisted, rather than work from an egoistic perspective where I thought I needed to be perfect. And therefore, whatever went wrong, I couldn't admit it. So now I'm quite happy to admit when I'm wrong, because then somebody will guide me in the right direction and I don't need to be wrong again.
Interesting. And from that particular experience, what will you say was some of the lessons you learned out of life, out of that particular point that you're now carrying up to this particular date?
I think the first thing I learned is resilience. I learned that however hard it is, if you really put your mind to it, you can go through it, over it, under it. Somehow you'll get through it. These too shall pass, if I may use those words. And so I learned that nothing lasts forever, and there's always a rainbow. So first and foremost, my biggest rainbow is that my children grew up with me, and so I was able to enjoy my youth with these children and build quite a close relationship with them, and have a fantastic time now enjoying them in their early adulthood when I'm still young enough to enjoy it, you know. So that's a big plus that I'll carry for the rest of my life, you know. The second one is to recognize that you realize that you've got more in you than you could ever know.
True.
But you actually have to be tested for it to come out.
True.
So if I didn't go through that hard time of starting life that way, I don't think I would have gotten very far, because life would have been so easy. But now I had to keep pushing myself and pushing myself. And I wanted a great life for my children. I'd grown up in a great life, so I wanted them to have an even better life. So I had to push myself. There was no one who was going to give it to me.
That's quite interesting. And one of your first assignments is with the company that we are right now, or maybe they're recording this, Standard Group. How was your experience? What exactly were you doing at Standard back then?
First and foremost, I really owe a lot of kudos to the Standard Media Group, because when they hired me, they gave me my first chance to test the waters of what it is like to be employed. So I was selling advertising space. And for anybody who knows sales, I think the 2 hardest jobs in the world is selling advertising space and selling insurance. And the minute you sell advertising space, you realize that first and foremost, the terminology bidii yako ndio itakuokoa. As in, your effort is what's going to rescue you from all the wars of the world.
Yeah.
You realize that very quickly because you have to be smart and you have to be hardworking. So what we used to do is that you would walk the whole of a street, like let's say pick up Likoni Road and say that's my street, and then come up with the idea that you're going to do a supplement on Likoni Road.
Yes.
And you would go door to door, cold calling, and trying to convince people to advertise in the Standard. And at the end of it, because at that time you're a freelancer, you'd be paid 25% of the revenue that you generated. So if you worked hard, soon you'd be making a lot more money than guys who are being paid a regular salary.
True.
So once you recognize, once I recognized that, suddenly I was making a lot more money than most people who had worked at the Standard for a very long time. Because God had just put me in a place where my skills, my aptitude, and my personality just worked. And so I did very well at the Standard. I have lots and lots of fond memories of the Standard and the people I worked with, because that's where I learned resilience. And that is where I learned the beauty of making money and having the financial freedom. Okay, not really freedom in that terminology, but just being able to live life without worrying about your next meal.
Interesting. And sales is such a key critical component of any particular business. And having had that particular experience being, in sales and being in commercial, what are some of the, tricks about sales that you learned out of that experience? Like, how do you close a sale? Because there's so many people who are gifted in terms of what they're doing, and not so many people who are gifted but cannot sell. What did you learn about sales?
The first thing I learned about sales from the Standard is that you must always sell from the perspective of the buyer, not from your own perspective. So the fact that I want the supplement to run so that I can earn a commission, so that I can pay school fees, is not my client's interest. Yeah. My client's interest is that their product or their profile will be amplified. So I can only sell the benefit to my client, and what I stand to gain is actually my secret. So 48 laws of power.
Yes.
Isn't it? I learned that without having ever read the book. Yeah. The first thing in 48 Laws of Power, you give the person what they want. So that you can get what you want. So that's the first rule. The second rule is really planning. That failing to plan is planning to fail. Because if you're going to sell, you must sit down and do your homework. By the time you walk into an organization, you know who the CEO is, you know a basic idea of their product line, why they do what they do. So when you're talking intelligently and putting yourself in your client's feet. When you talk about closing the sale, that is actually the most important part. Many people know how to sell. They open the sale, they talk, they convince the person, but they don't know how to close the sale. And this is where you learn to actually be very capitalistic and very straight up. True. And it's sometimes against our African culture, especially for women, because you have to be very straight up that, you know what, for you to get this, you need to put this investment in, and you need to commit now so that I can make sure that you're in it. And then have the paperwork ready so that you make it easy for the person to close the sale. So yes, I learned that at the Standard Media Group.
Interesting. And one of the things I was just checking out, so after the Standard Group, you went to Colgate, and I think when I was just doing your research, was that I learned that you used to spend so much time at the workplace and you sort of like sold your soul. I think that's how exactly you actually phrased that in one of the interviews. What did you learn about, that phase of your life, having being an employee and just having to give your all within a particular place? What did you learn out of that particular experience?
First, I'll say Colgate was one of my best employers because they taught me professionalism. They taught me how to work using systems and processes and the beauty of standards. At Colgate, one tube of toothpaste cannot have a variance from the next. And if ever there is a variance, there has to be scientific research proving that the efficacy and the safety has been tested and it's okay. And I learned that, which means that there's no gray area. It's black or white, And it's a very important thing to learn in life, because then could have been, should have been, doesn't exist. It is what it is, And that's the biggest lesson I learned at Colgate. At Colgate, because I was learning so much and I was enjoying the work so much, I immersed myself totally. I got to understand the manufacturing process for all the products that we had. So I worked on the factory floor. Before I even got to work now in real marketing. And then when it came to working in marketing, I had to understand the entire value chain from the process of distribution from the factory, going to the regions, the distributors who sell, how it goes to the wholesalers,
Wow.
how it goes to the retailer, how it gets to the kiosk,
So
how it gets
everything.
into your hands,
Yeah.
how I convince you, therefore, through that entire pipeline to buy that product.
Wow.
And if you remember, for a lot of people, the toothpaste you use, you learn about it in childhood. Because what your mouth learns to like,
True.
you usually don't deviate from it.
True.
So we realized that we had to have the schools program, and so we'd sell Colgate
Wow.
to school kids. Just give them free samples, they go home, they use it. And one of the lessons I learned from Colgate that I carry to date in my marketing career is that, number one, you did a minimum of 21 days to change somebody's habits, palate, sense of smell to the familiar. So if I give you a toothpaste, I can't give you a toothpaste to use for 3 days. I have to give you enough for you to use for a month.
21 days.
Because by the end of a month,
Yeah.
your eyes are familiar with the colors, your mouth has understood it, you know, the smells of it have become familiar, and we all gravitate to the familiar.
Interesting.
The second thing I learned from
Yeah.
Colgate is that if you're going to do a sample, do real sampling. Don't come and sample 3 people and say you've done sampling. You have to sample at least 25% of your target audience.
Oh.
Otherwise, you haven't done a proper sampling. So, I mean, really big lessons there.
Yeah.
And also, if you're going to run anything in marketing,
Yeah.
you're better off doing something nice, big, audacious, that will be memorable, rather than doing a series of small blips, because then they're not memorable.
Interesting. And you're going to take a small blip for a break. So I'm going to take a short commercial break, but it's such an interesting show that I'm literally enjoying. So after the break, I'll continue this particular interesting conversation with Joanne Mwangi, the CEO of PMS. So welcome back to the show. So before we went on a break, we were just having this interesting journey that the lady from the Alliance, the University of Nairobi, went through up to the point whereby he got into employment, worked for Standard, worked for college. Where did the dream for PMS come about?
When I left Colgate, I was at the fork of a road. I had to decide which way I was going to go. I knew I was going to go into entrepreneurship, but I did not know which line. And so based on my expertise at that time, I either was going to go into manufacturing, which I well understood, having worked at
Colgate,
for long enough.
How long were you
3 years.
3 years, all right.
Or go into marketing, which I was already practicing. When I did my assessment, I actually decided to go into marketing because first and foremost, it was the easier road. It required less capital than manufacturing, and also it was something more familiar. So at that time, there were very few marketing companies. And so I was going to get into a niche, which there was very little competition. And so that's what made me choose to go into marketing. I haven't regretted it, but sometimes I do wonder how my path would have been if
You
I'd
went to
taken the other
manufacturing.
side. Yes.
Interesting. And
Yes.
so just take me through the phase. So had you, by the time you're transitioning, did you have savings? What's it called? What was your state of your life? Because I know you already had your children, so you have some responsibility. How did you immerse yourself into it?
First, I think that being young was the greatest asset I had. And so I wasn't risk averse. And I probably wasn't as cognizant of what the effects
Yes.
of the decision I was making were going to be. So I had savings enough to last me about 6 months. So the first thing I did is pay school fees and pay rent. So that at least I knew I would have a roof regardless of what happened. I also had the confidence that with my CV, if all else failed, I would know in that time my thinking was that within 3 months I'll know and I'll have 3 months to look for a job. And so I'll find a job. And I had a lot of confidence, having sold advertising space, that if the worst came to the worst, there was no way I was going to fail to get into some hustle and at least make
Money,
food. Money for food and just basics. And at that time, basics was all I was looking for. So that was one of the things that I had. So I started my business, and I remember very well the first person who gave me what I would call career advice from an entrepreneurial perspective was a lady I went to design my logo. And she told me that whatever you do, Joanne, don't give up before you've put in at least 18 months. I don't believe there's any magic to 18 months, but it gave me a time frame. And therefore, when things were really, really rough, I used to convince myself, you've not yet done 18 months, Joanne, hang in there. And believe you me, by month 6, going to 8, suddenly the doors started opening. I can tell you I was so broke, I was getting to the place where I was so burnt out, effort with no results. But finally the results started coming. And once the results started coming, it was fast and furious. The investment of those 6 months came through. And so if I was to say anything about the 18 months, is that you're creating a pipeline. And finally, it does fill up and you start getting something. And so I started getting some money coming in, and I did not have cash flow to do the business. So I was borrowing left, right, and center from fools, from family, from friends.
Yes.
And finally, you get to a place where you actually have your own cash flow to keep the business going. But it meant really sacrificing.
Yes.
I could not spend money on myself or on my children, except for bare necessities.
Interesting. And in terms of that particular experience, just take me through what was that particular breakthrough deal? Because I'm sure the first days you're trying to just put things together. What was the first deal that you got to, like, you know, I should stick on this?
The first thing that came through was an LPO from Reckitt, now Reckitt Benkiza. That time it used to be called Reckitt and Coleman.
Yes.
And when they gave me the LPO, it was for something like 680,000 shillings. Huh?
Back in it was
Whoa, can you imagine?
Back in the day.
I was rich, man. I was rich. But I didn't have the money to do the job. And I needed at least 150,000 shillings to do the job. And so I had to borrow. And so I borrowed 50,000 bob from 3 people. So one of them actually had to take a cooperative bank loan to lend me money. So at least that tells you that my friends were real friends. So I got the 150,000. So when Reckitt paid me the 50% prepayment, I then was able to refund them their money and use the rest of it as working capital. And when finally the full check came, I could pay all my debt, pay my future rent, pay school fees, and feel like I now had some working capital. I don't have to borrow from friends from zero, you know. So that's how I kept building up my working capital, by retaining the profits in the business rather than spending it.
Interesting.
And the next big job actually was BAT. And when BAT came calling, suddenly I was dealing with numbers that I had never predicted, because, you know, they could give you an LPU at that time for 5 million shillings.
Wow.
I mean, it was like today being given an LPO for 5 billion, to be honest. It was more money than I had dreamt of. So quickly, I would say by the time I was getting to 27, I had more money than I knew how to manage.
And how did you go about it?
You know how it goes with fools. Fools and their money soon parted. So, because
so you parted with part of the money.
So what would happen is, if anybody came to me with a problem, I would actually just give them money.
Oh, you became Messiah.
I'm an empath. So when people would come to me with their problems, the first thing I would say is, how can I sleep when I know this person has a problem and I have the money, so I give them. And you know, quickly, people know the kind of person you are and they use you. And so I wasted a lot of the money. Thankfully, my mother, who is quite an astute business person, as I referred earlier, was able to step in and tell me, you know, whatever you do, start investing so that you have a home, a roof over your head. So that was really a defining moment, because it gave me a target. And then after that, I read a book that was called Defining Success. And this book actually changed my entire trajectory, because it says you have to have your personal definition of success. And once I crafted my personal definition of success, I stopped being on the rat race where I was just copying any Joneses. If you bought a car, I need to buy a car. If you move to Buruburu from wherever, I need to move. No. And suddenly, I now had a plan. And at that time, my plan was very simple. I needed to own 2 houses so that I could live in one, and the other one gives me passive income, so that if ever I don't have an income, I don't starve. So that was the full extent of my personal strategic plan.
Okay, interesting. And primarily you said that you read the book about defining success. How would you say that through your experience and having gone through the phases that you have to where you are right now, how do you define success?
I would say that first and foremost, success and the definition of success is very personal. For some people, success is defined by money, how much money they have in the bank. For others, it is the property they own. For others, it's the impact they're having in their family's lives or in the society's life. And I think your definition changes through the seasons. So initially for me, my definition, as I've said, was just simply to know that I have a cushion for financial challenges. And then as you move on and start the business and the business grows, suddenly the definition is that I want my business to be sustainable, so that these young people that I have hired don't have to worry that at the end of the month I won't be able to pay them.
True.
That became another definition of success. And then later, the definition of success moves outside of you and it becomes recognition.
True.
I want that PMS is recognized as a Kenyan brand. I want that PMS is winning awards internationally and locally. I want that PMS has branches across Africa, you know, and then you do the full circle and you come back almost to where you started, that the definition of success goes back to how am I impacting lives through the work that I do. And then you start seeking to do work that is actually of impact in society, that adds to value to lives.
Interesting. So you've been at PMS for more than 2 decades. It's been an interesting journey. And primarily whereby, what's it called, through this particular journey, you're the one steering this particular vision. What are the elements of leadership you've learned? Because primarily it takes a leader to literally bring a vision to light. What exactly some of the lessons around leadership that you learned through your journey?
I think the biggest leadership journey is that you have to remain very humble. Because sometimes when you're leading, you think you know it all, but you don't. And the people, actually the humblest people or the lowliest people in the organization could be seeing your blind side, and you have to give them the opportunity to tell you when you're wrong. So having that culture of openness where people can actually tell you when you're going wrong, that's very important. The second thing is to always, which ties into always be learning, always be improving yourself. The fact that Formula A worked yesterday doesn't mean Formula A is going to work tomorrow.
True.
Look at the digital revolution we are in right now. Anybody who started business when I started and hasn't had to move completely a paradigm shift from where we are to where the Gen Z is, it's not going to be sustainable. They're not going to survive, you know. We're moving to uncharted territory. So old tools will not do the job. So you have to retool yourself and learn afresh. So being open to do that is very important in leadership. I would also say that in leadership, being transparent. This is a leadership lesson I learned through Stanford Seed program. That the team you're working with, you have to be ready to have a very transparent organization. They need to know when you're making money. They need to know when you're losing money. Because then they actually work with you rather than you and then them. Because when the team knows that, my goodness, the organization is in trouble, they even stop wasting. They're even the ones who tell you, you know what, ma'am, for margin optimization, why don't we stop using cars here and drivers and use Uber instead? Because we don't have to keep you know, the maintenance of an Uber, or sorry, of a car. We could be Ubering. And you'll be surprised how much money you save. So the final lesson, and maybe the most important, is recognizing that finance is the heart of every business.
True.
Because if as a leader, you're not looking at the numbers and looking at the numbers with scientific lenses, so that you're understanding your ratios. What is my profitability?
True.
How much do I have in cash flow? How many months can I survive? What are the buffers that we have in case of an unforeseen eventuality? In case of a client not paying? What is the risk I will put on any one client? So for example, at PMS, there's no one client who is supposed to have controlling more than 30% of our revenue. Because if they pull out, then you're finished.
True.
You know? So you must diversify your risk. But you see, these lessons come over time.
Yes.
Yeah, so those are some of the lessons I would articulate right now.
Interesting. And one of the things that you think we're discussing also offline is the aspect of COVID and how exactly it sort of like brought a different dynamic, or rather brought something that you're not seeing, that you can build a business for so long and it can go down within just one particular, what's it called, pandemic. How was it for you? Because you mentioned to me you had to literally shut down most of the operations. How was it going through that phase, and how is it rebuilding after that?
That's a very important question. And I think the first thing I would say is that there was the power of networks to hold me together during that. I was the president at that point of the Stanford Seed Network, and it's a business network. Everybody there is a business leader in their own right. So the network actually helped a lot, because we would talk to each other and say, guys, I'm struggling. And you can be truly honest, you know, and vulnerable in that group and say, you know, the money I have versus my needs, I can't. And you find very quickly, people are very pragmatic when they're looking at a business where they're not emotionally attached. So they tell you, you know, Joanne, I don't understand why you're paying salaries when you have no work. So yes, you like these people. Yes, but that's an emotional decision. You now need to make a business decision.
Yeah.
You know. So the first thing I had to do was very quickly make the business decisions that I couldn't afford to maintain a payroll when there was no income. And so quickly follow the procedures of paying the right dues and pay generously as much as possible, and then release the people in a way that they can always come back if need be. The second thing was to lower costs to the barest minimum. So we literally shut down everything that wasn't absolutely necessary and pivoted as quickly as we could to a hybrid of almost 100% virtual work and maybe 10 to 5% physical.
Yeah.
Because then that kept costs low, and that also meant that we stayed connected in one way or the other. Now, the challenge was that our clients, their immediate reaction was to cut marketing budget.
True.
And so there was no revenue coming. So we had to rely on savings for a long time. And that fortresses what I was saying earlier, that you must actually understand your financials very, very well.
Interesting. So besides COVID, I think also just doing my research also knew, I got to learn about also your hardest time was dealing with the grief when you lost your dad. And I think one of the things that I saw, maybe I just on my research, is that you had to go through fasting to go through that period. As an entrepreneur, I think sometimes you never thought about the difficult times that you go through, because life and business are intertwined. What are some of the lessons around grief and maybe going through difficult moments, such as COVID, such as like losing someone like your dad, that you learned through this?
Wow, that's a toughie. Life happens to everybody, whether you're employed, an entrepreneur, unemployed, life happens. And unfortunately, when these things happen, you can't predict. They just hit you like a sledgehammer. And we all cope differently.
Yeah.
Some people are able to actually just accept it as quickly as possible and go through the grieving process and recover. And I find that as a human, my normal reaction is a delayed response. I think I go into that stage of autopilot. I don't know whether you can call it shock or denial, but I go into autopilot where I'm doing. I'm not a human being, I'm a human doing at that moment. So I do to deal with the specific crisis. And then once the crisis is done, and I have time where I have no option but to reflect and to face the reality, I will crash. Okay? So I have learned that I need to allow myself to not just do, but to also allow the grief or the process of pain to penetrate so that I can weather it in small doses rather than postpone it and then it crushes me. So as a human, that's what I've learned. Now, what do I do about that? I've learned first and foremost to allow myself to say that I am sad and to say that I'm hurting, and not to feel that I should be superwoman. I have a right to also need some TLC, some downtime, some help. And so asking for help is one of the critical things I have learned.
So whether it's
not a weakness. So whether I'm asking for help from business, whether I'm asking for help from a friend, from a counselor, whether I have to go to somebody and just break down and cry, I also deserve that space to exhale. And I think the minute you recognize that you are a human being who deserves all these things, life becomes easier.
Interesting. Also, something bright happened, but immediately it was also dimmed, was your appointment as a chairman of the Kenya Tourism Board. First of all, how did you receive the news? Because it's such an interesting... How did you receive both news of appointment and then termination within 6 months?
Okay, you had to go there. So let me Totally. So let me put it this way. First and foremost, in life is very interesting, and I'll go biblical. No? He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So also, he who is appointed by Gazette notice is disappointed by Gazette notice. That's the long and short of it. I was appointed by Gazette notice.
Yes.
I was not aware. The first I got aware that I had been appointed was a flurry of messages and my phone ringing non-stop on a Saturday morning. And so when I finally picked the phone, because sometimes I really ignore my phone, the first person said, "Congratulations, you got a big job." And I said, "What job?" And the guy says, "You don't know?" I said, "No, I don't." And he tells me, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I don't." And he sends me the Gazette notice. And I said, oh, wow. And of course, I'm excited,
Yes.
and happy and thrilled. And I felt that I'd gotten the opportunity to give back to this country
Yes.
from my many years of experience and expertise in a place that I truly felt I would be utilized for the good of this country. So, of course, I went into it with absolute gusto.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, before you can even sit squarely on the seat,
Things happened.
Another gazette notice and another flurry of communication is what tells me that I've been degazetted. So I also didn't know when I was being disappointed. I simply received a flurry of calls, and then when finally I checked my phone, I was actually in meetings. When I checked, it's like here how you can know, you know, I was wearing my iWatch, so it kept beeping, but I couldn't concentrate. So when finally I went and checked, is when I saw
another gazette
notice degazetting me. So when you ask that question, that's the long and short of it.
The beginning and the end.
Beginning and the end.
By a gazette.
Yes.
Interesting. So I wanted to play, I have a flurry of a few questions in 90 seconds, and primarily just answer them what exactly comes to mind, because it's just primarily just an easy game as we come to an end. So we can start. Are you more of a thinker or a doer?
Thinker.
What do you think is the meaning of life?
Purpose.
What is your favorite color?
Purple.
How do you start your day?
I wake up, I do nothing, and then I have a coffee.
Interesting. What scares you?
Caterpillars.
Caterpillars?
Yeah.
Why? Which caterpillars? You know, the
furry
machines.
Ones.
Oh.
No, they're not the machines. The furry caterpillars. Yeah, they give me the...
What does a person need to be happy?
Self-awareness and contentment.
What's your best age?
My current age.
And then the final question. Name a word that starts with the letter Q.
Coffee.
Q.
Yes.
Coffee.
That's my husband's name.
Ah!
Yes.
How? How do you spell it?
Q-U-O-P-H-I.
Q-U-O. Wow.
P-H-I.
Coffee.
Yes.
That's an interesting. I've never heard about
Exactly.
it. Even I never expected that answer.
Exactly.
I was wondering which coffee.
Now you know.
Now I know. Interesting. And just maybe the final question. You've been at it for 25 years, which is a long period, and you don't even look like it. You've kept yourself well.
Thank you.
Success is good.
Well, genes too.
Genes too. The genes will leave you, but anyway, me and my dry jokes. So what do you see as your finish line? What's it called? When do you see yourself probably surrendering the seat of the CEO? Or maybe what's your next life, having been at it for so long?
I think for me, the seat of the CEO is not important to me anymore. I would really want to surrender that seat to somebody who moves PMS to the next level. I don't believe I'm that person anymore. My season is done. You know, so as soon as I find that person, I'm very happy to vacate the seat, and I'm consciously working towards that. I believe that in the next 2 years, I'll be out of PMS. I'll no longer be Joanne of PMS. As to what I'll do in the new season, my passion has always been entrepreneurship. So I believe very strongly that I'll be doing either of two things. One, either I'll be doing something purposeful for the benefit of this country, because I'm very, very passionate about this country. Our brand, making sure that Kenya is positioned right, that we say the things we're supposed to say about this country. I really feel pained when I go out there and I see how people look up to Kenya, and then we have such a negative self-image, you know? So I wish I could work on that. I really, that would be the greatest joy I could have.
Hope the president is listening.
I mean,
another gazette should come into place.
Another gazette notice, please. And then I really also believe that if not that, then I'll definitely be working to support entrepreneurship development, because if there's one thing I believe is that the day we equalize wealth distribution and we help people access a decent livelihood through the work of their hands and their brains in whatever sector, we teach people to scale these businesses. Kenya is a place that can rise faster than a phoenix.
Interesting. And I think you've summarized what I actually got from one of your teachers, that you wrote that I have the potential to touch lives through entrepreneurship. It's my little big thing.
It is.
My goodness. Wow. I think time flies so fast, and I can't believe you've come to the end of the show from such an interesting conversation with Joanne Mwangi, who's currently the CEO of PMS, one of the leading marketing agency and communication agency, and she's done quite well, and so much actually I've learned through this particular episode. To wind up, I always want to let you know that you can always come at the Capital Club. As you can see, we're in one of the meeting rooms, and one of the particular benefits of being a member of the Capital Club is your access to different meeting rooms, access to the event space, access to do so many different things besides even just networking with the who's who. My name is Ian Dennis, and this has been the Late Night Business, where we talk about all business, and hopefully you can actually get to learn from our conversation. Until next week, see you right here on KTN Home. Time flies, my goodness. Oh, it's been